In this video, I will try to show you the spiritual and Hegelian aspect of the video game franchise, The Legend of Zelda. As an empirical individual, I am a decadent, degenerate Westerner playing video games. I don't play video games anymore, but I have, and it is the product of my environment. But as someone said, I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me, and this is the purpose of absolute idealism. But I will try to show anyone watching this that there is Hegelian reason in The Legend of Zelda, and I have noted brief remarks about the games. And because cultural Hegelianism, the purpose is to show that the highest divine truths about absolute spirit, about God, about the essence of all things are expressed in modern pop culture. So you have to seek reason and rationality in the most trivial, apparently trivial aspect of modern existence. And what is trivial is very spiritual, and that's a Hegelian process. So The Legend of Zelda is about exploration, struggle, confronting monsters, collecting items, and being rewarded, and just enjoying the journey. In the original game of 1986 and in Breath of the Wild, freedom is an illusion because you think you are free to go wherever you want, to do whatever you want to do. But in the end, you understand that in order to complete the game, you are necessarily led to complete all the temples. So freedom and necessity are united in the first game and the last game. You get more powerful with each item, and the more items you collect, you try to connect them one another, to use them in their reciprocal interaction. And the best puzzles are those who require from you to use several items differently, to use all the things that you have gathered on your path. And these are the most stimulating and enjoyable puzzles. Also, in the video game community, it's a decadent form of being, but in my purpose, in my process of absolute idealism, I must justify everything. So I don't blame those who play video games, because even in the video game communities, there are conflicts inherent in human nature, because those who think of themselves as true gamers take from themselves a higher view of themselves. They self-gratify by saying, oh, I enjoy hard games, and I regret that modern games are too easy because it's made for the masses, and the masses are stupid, and we are the true gamers, and we can overcome the difficult puzzles and the difficult struggles in video games. So you find this aspect of human nature, the need to always downgrade others and always to gratify the self, even in the most negligible aspects of existence. And yeah, the Japanese makers of the game are confronted by a contradiction, because they have to make puzzles in their games which are made for relatively high IQ people, so that they can the players can enjoy themselves. But if it's too difficult, the masses won't buy the games, and if it's too easy, it will not be appreciated neither. So you have to find, the whole difficulty of being a video game maker is to find the proper balance between difficulty for the high IQ people and accessibility for the low IQ people, knowing that if you cross the measure in one side or the other, you will fail as a commercial product. And just to see a dialectical twist, Dark Souls, the game, it's very difficult. It's for the hardcore gamers, and because of this hardcore aspect, it has gained a reputation which has made the games become a selling success. So you find the logical aspect of Hegel's logic of quantitative determinations, what has the highest intensity, is also an extensive determination. So intense quantity and extensive quantity are actually one, and that's just an illustration. Yeah. The Legend of Zelda is a very successful series, and for this precise quantitative reason, it's because it's a spiritual as spiritual as you can get in the realm of video games. It's a spiritual franchise, and this explains why people enjoy it so much and why it is the favorite video game franchise of many people, and I will try to explain why. A funny thing about The Legend of Zelda is that they are always recycling the same game, so you can say it's always the same game. They are always reproducing the same game. It's always the same. So the divine success of The Legend of Zelda is that they succeed in doing the same game all over again, but it's always different. And Hegel, in his logic, shows that identity, because it is identical to itself, it is different from the difference. So difference is a moment of identity, and difference is difference. So it is different from identity, so it's identical to itself. So identity and difference must be thought of in a unity, and the absolute is the unity of identity and difference. And James Bond, The Legend of Zelda, they are so successful because they succeed in producing a different game which is always the same, and which leads the players of video games to question about the highest speculative thinking is, what is the essence of Zelda? And they say that some games have lost the identity of the franchise. They have denied or betrayed their identity. So when they speak about what constitutes the essence of a Zelda game, they are asking themselves the highest Hegelian speculative questions. What is identity? What is difference? What is essence? What is the concept of the thing? What makes the being of a thing? And yeah, so if you want to find an answer to this question, you have to read Hegel's logic. Yeah, the most revolutionary game in the franchise is Breath of the Wild, and this is also a very Hegelian process, because the most revolutionary act that you can imagine, and you find this in Evola, is to revolt against modernity and to go back to the most backward past. So to go back is to go forward, and the true revolutionary is the one who brings about a restored state of being of ancient times. And the French Revolution was a will to return to antiquity, but between antiquity, Greek and Roman antiquity, and the 18th century, there had been the entire process of historical development, so you could never obtain what you thought you had lost. So every reactionary movement is a progressive movement because it reacts against the passing of time, and it includes within itself all the negative aspects of being. So the most revolutionary act that you could do is to go back into the past. And in the past, we were all united with God. So the true revolutionary act is to bring about the reunion with God. That's what Havola says in Revolt Against the Modern World. And that's the reason why Breath of the Wild, which is a return to the roots of the franchise, is such a success. Skyward Sword, the game, the 3D Zelda game just before Breath of the Wild, is considered to be some sort of the worst 3D Zelda game, but it is because it is the worst that it has enabled the appearance of Breath of the Wild, which is now widely considered to be the very best or the second best or one of the very best. So those who have played the game, you will notice that Breath of the Wild contains within itself, as aufgehoben, as negated and preserved, the determinations which were already present in Skyward Sword. So Skyward Sword was the end of a dialectical process. It had exhausted, in a sense of this is exhausting, it has developed all the potentialities of the formula brought about by the Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time. And it was just, okay, that's too much. That we've done all we could with this formula, so we need to shake things up and to bring about a revolutionary change by going back to the past, but not completely negating Skyward Sword. You take the positive within the negative, and that's what brought about Breath of the Wild, and which made it such a success. Also, a comment about the first game, The Legend of Zelda on the NES, about Majora's Mask. And these games are very difficult when you play them at first, but the more you understand, the more you appreciate. And that's the same with Hegel's philosophy. It's a very difficult, painful philosophy, but the more you understand, the more you appreciate the fact of existence. And yeah. Also, a brief comment about The Adventure of Link, the second game on the NES. This is also a very psychological, human, and what is human is divine. So it's a divine aspect of the human psyche, is that within the Zelda community, there are people who praise themselves for having overcome The Adventure of Link, the hardest, most difficult game in the franchise. And they praise themselves and say, this game is fantastic because it has forced me to be enduring and to struggle and to be resistant and to persevere. And when I completed the game, I was so happy. This was the happiest, the greatest satisfaction in my life as a video game player. So this is Nietzsche, which said that fulfillment comes from overcoming resistance, and that's a dialectical process. Everyone hates the second game, The Adventure of Link, except those who completed the game and said, actually, it's a great game. So that's the same with the negative. Everyone hates the negative except the negative which has overcome itself, which is becoming one with God. But that's a little bit too speculative. Yeah, what about the franchise as a whole? The truth is the whole, as Hegel says. So the truth about The Legend of Zelda is the totality of all the games, including the bad ones. And what some players do not understand is that the bad ones are those who make the good ones so good, because it's a relative, good and bad are in a relative relationship. And Ocarina of Time is only so good because Phantom Hourglass is so bad, or because The Adventure of Link is so difficult, or whatever. So when you play most of the games, you appreciate the ones you do because you dislike the one you don't, and they are in a dialectical, reciprocal unity. And many people love Majora's Mask because they say, oh, it's so different from Ocarina of Time. But this is a Hegelian process, because they do not understand that in their love for Majora's Mask, there is the absence of a presence, or the presence of an absence, because they love Majora's Mask as the negation of Ocarina of Time, but because it is more spiritual, it is darker, it is more profound. But they do not understand that their love from Majora's Mask comes only from the classical aspect of Ocarina of Time. And Ocarina is to Majora's Mask what classic art and classic philosophy of the 17th century is to the how do you call it, the Dionysian Barocco, I don't know how to say it in English, the Barocco aspect of in the early end of 16th century, early 17th century. So you have the Dionysian and the Apollinian aspect. And yeah, and so the truth about Zelda, The Legend of Zelda, is the whole development. And a game would not exist without the other, because the worst games in the franchise are those who enabled the greatest games to be produced. It's a dialectical interaction. So that's the most difficult thing to do from an intellectual standpoint, is to understand the negative as a moment of the positive. And I, as a negative individual, I must understand this. And this is the most difficult thing that I will have to understand, but I know that it is my purpose. And yeah, I will make a second video because I have more things to say about Zelda.